Hello, everybody. This is Pete Morris. I'm starting out the Comanche Zoom for January 21st. Tonight's topic is propellers, design, performance, and care with Darrell Pool. He is a sales rep for Harshel Propellers, and since a lot of Comanches have that, we're going to have a bunch of good information on those. For now, we're going to be just doing our usual, who you are, where you are, and what you fly, and let everybody get back in to unmute themselves and talk.
I'm Ray Fay from Madison, Wisconsin. I fly a 260B model. And like everybody involved with Comanche, I love it.
Welcome, Ray. Good to see you on again. Thanks for being here.
Thanks.
And sorry, this is CJ Stump. I'm up in Vermont where we're having another snowstorm. Fly a 180 and a 260B.
Afternoon, Andy White calling from Covelo, California. I fly a 180.
Good.
Welcome, Andy, and thanks for being here. My the 180 I've been plane sitting is out in California, so I'll be out in your half of the country not too long from now to fly it back.
Northern or Southern California?
SoCal.
All right, a little distance.
Yep.
Maybe we can meet halfway.
A bit, yeah, that'd be great. We actually did the trip out there to support the one of the autopilot for Comanche projects, and that's moving along. So it's played its part. Anyways, everybody just jump into any quiet moment, just like ATC, unmute and say who you are, where you are, and what you fly.
My name is Kelly Kober. I need a new propeller. A week ago, I went gear up in Wilmington, Delaware. I've got a 260B. I've had since 1992, 28 years. But I took off from my airport near Philadelphia last Monday or Tuesday, and the gear motor circuit breaker popped when I was trying to retract my gear. And I spent the next hour and a half with gear half down, half up, and disconnected the motor. I've done all that before, and I could not retract. I could not get the gear down. I even moved the seat back and put both feet on the pry bar. And so I flew by Wilmington Tower. If anybody familiar with it, they have 3 runways. And after we talked a little while, I asked him which runway I could close, and went gear up there. So now the FAA and the insurance company are all looking at it. But that means I need a propeller. So
Did you have was it a prop strike and you got to do the engine also?
well, the prop hit. I did pull all the power, but I didn't. The prop was still windmilling when I landed. So they're going to have to pull the engine and check it too.
Yeah, that's the hard part, actually. I mean, hard in turn, the hard thing to take.
I'm Jason Rosbeck. I'm in.
Welcome, Kelly.
Go for it, Jason.
Sorry, Jason. I'm in Denver, Colorado. I fly 6951 Papa. It's been in the family since 1964.
That officially gets the coolest intro of the night award, Jason. I love that you've had your Comanche since 64. So it's been in your family since new?
No, it was. It's a 1960. It was. According to the logs, there was some skins replaced on the right wing, and a strut was replaced in 63. We bought it. My wife's grandpa bought it in 64. So I'm guessing that the guy put it down hard and had a gear collapse or something, and his wife told him to sell the airplane. So.
Hi, this is Scott Derflinger. I'm at Lot, Indiana, and I fly a 1965 260.
I'm Neil McCarty down in South Carolina.
Oh, well done. I'm second generation as well. And Kel.
Ray Fay, I met Ray in Spanish Peaks a long time ago, mountain flying. Nice to see him again, but I know where there is a prop available. In fact, I'm thinking about getting it because my prop is a Harshel, and it needs an overhaul for the 5-year overhaul. And wondering whether I need to just do the overhaul or get this other prop that doesn't require the overhaul. So once I make that decision, if that prop's still available, I'll get in contact with the guy that needs it. I've got a 180. It's got a A1A, I think is the designation on the engine. In fact, I'm thinking about getting an engine replacement as well, but it's serial number 49, and my overhaul was done in 1977. So even though I have some time on the overhaul, I'm thinking about maybe going ahead and getting another engine.
You definitely came to the right night. You're going to ask questions about Hartzell props.
I'm Andy Martin from Waterloo, Ontario, Canada. I fly a 1960 180 since 2007, enjoying every minute of it.
Fred Hofstetter, November 6226 pop. It's a 250, fly out of Concord, California.
I'm John Westerfield. I fly out, live in Birmingham, flying out of Houma, Louisiana right now. The guy that had the gear up, he said he had the circuit breaker pop. Was there any other defects that was found in the preliminary look over?
We, they pulled the gear. I don't know how to optimize, how to share that. They lifted the plane from the runway and the gear was still stuck. It wouldn't drop. And they're coming in tomorrow to put it on jacks and try to figure it out. I've crawled, the plane's on wooden trestles right now. I've crawled under there and looked all over and I cannot see a problem. So hopefully tomorrow we find something. Sorry.
Okay, no, just curious. Don't want it to happen again, you know?
Right. And Kelly, just this is CJ back. I just want to say I saw your story, and it looked like you did a beautiful job of handling the situation as well as you possibly could, and under the circumstances. Just wanted to add my accolade. You know, minimal. Your plane looked beautiful, minimal damage to anything. So.
Thank you, CJ. Yeah, there was a kind of a non-event when I finally landed. I picked Wilmington because of the runways, and there's an International Guard base there that has the emergency equipment. And they all came out. We're there for, it was like 2 hours before we could leave because they all just do practice, and they had so much fun having a real incident. But one thing I was surprised at that I thought about, but then I decided, my wife was on board. I thought, you know, I'd just be extra safe. I landed with full flaps, and I thought about whether I should do that or not, but I did. But the plane landed so flat that the 2 flaps only have probably an inch by an inch square of damage right by the fuselage, just a rub where the rivet's gone. So I was surprised I didn't damage my flaps.
Yep, oh yeah, your photos look beautiful. Just a quick note, given the topic, there's a trading post buy sell in the Comanche Zoom invite. So anybody who and it's for stuff that's needed as well as stuff that's for sale. So for
Your audio is breaking up, DJ.
You're looking for a prop. You may want to post that could then respond that is available. Apologies, everyone. I was just trying to mention that I sell trade. It's a trading post, but it's for things that are needed, parts wanted, as well as parts available. So for anybody who's like in Kelly's situation and need
CJ, you're really breaking up, Pat.
Just post a note in there. It's free. And to do that, just send an email to les.thomas, les.thomas, THOMAS, @gmail.com. Oh, okay.
CJ, you're really breaking up bad. For me, anyway.
Yeah, she's underwater. And we're hearing somebody's television or something in the background too.
Anyway, Rich Bergman, 1967, 260B, really nice plane, and 9242 Popov, had it for about 8 years. And right now it's up on jacks. I'm going through the landing gear, the AD. And I understand about putting it down on the runway. I put a Glass Air 1RG down on the runway and a beautiful landing, and the right gear collapsed right underneath the plane. What a ride, and a fiberglass crotch rocket. And don't ever want to do that again. And it was a Glass Air problem with a bad weld.
Do you think the shape of the Comanche helps with a gear up, being so square?
I think it's the way the landing gears stick out of the bottom a bit. When the gears retracted, it gives the plane something to slide on. I think 250s with the dual wishbone are better than 260s for that. You probably don't even scratch the belly up all that much.
Well, my 260B, the gear, when it collapsed, it didn't collapse fully into the wells. And I was surprised there was just enough wheel down of the three that none of the gear doors are damaged, which really surprised me.
Did you bust a trunnion? Did you bust a trunnion on the side?
I don't know. I've crawled under there, but it was hard to, I mean, I couldn't completely get underneath, but we'll see tomorrow.
Yeah. We've seen this happen with both original conduits in cold weather, where the grease, which is already old and getting really stiff, gets so stiff that it's popping the circuit breaker. Another possible reason is that it's possible to assemble the scissors linkages upside down. And if you do that, or if an AMP does that, and by the way, some of the Comanches even came out of the factory with this, and the scissors linkages, the two pieces of white painted metal that fold like a scissors to allow the strut the oleo strut to go through its range of motion. If they're installed upside down, sometimes an ANP not recognizing that the assembly is wrong will shim them out. They'll shim out the bolt that's holding those two pieces together, and that puts stress on the bolt. And then a hard landing or a heavy side load can possibly cause that bolt to snap. If that happens, the main gear will rotate 90 degrees, it'll pivot, and the nose gear wheel would lose, steering authority, obviously. So those are two reasons that we know have caused failures to completely retract the gear. But obviously you'll know more later, just to let people know those are two things that, and Matt Kirk and Hans Newbert are working on doing their landing gear maintenance Zoom, and that will be done at a different time than the normal time to accommodate Matt's schedule. We're expecting to see that in about 3 weeks. That was CJ speaking, sorry about that. I'm gonna be losing connection here in about 2 minutes.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna go to the my commercial message here, which is this one. Okay. And there we go. this week is the Propeller Design, Performance, and Care with Darrell Pool. If it was a wings thing, that's how you would get wings credit. Tonight is not at this point, so we don't have to worry about that. The swap meet that CJ was talking about, that's the next thing down there. And Les Thomas is the guy that is, taking care of that stuff right now. We try and include that in all of the Comanche Zoom invitations that we get from Constant Contact. Unfortunately, I don't do it on the ones that I send out, but that's all right. And then the documents page down below, that's a great source of information about Comanches. All of the parts manuals, all of the service manuals, a lot of the sales brochures, and a lot of the POHs are on that website. It's worth a look. Comanche Gap, we've been still working on, Bill Cadis has been working on getting us to be more friendly with each other. And that's what that's all about. Museum in Palaka is still looking for a little support. And the swapping quarter, we're looking for someone to take over. Les would rather not be doing that job, but right now he is the one that's doing it for the swap meet. If you were going to do, again, if you're going to do a Zoom, Comanche Zoom for a wings credit, this is the way you would have to do it. And fundraising, there's a lot of things that we're trying to do, and people have been asking. Right here is how you could, if you wanted to, send in some money to support the programs that we're doing. We've been doing a lot of different things with the, in terms of support, not just Comanche Zoom. So, we could appreciate any help that you can give us. And these are some of the things we've been thinking about. The Comanche Zoom costs themselves, and then parts. We're working on projects to find someone that can do welding, someone who can do machining, and then the whole thing about owner-produced parts, Part 43 stuff. And the 337 document collection, that's also being done. And the neat thing about that is if you have the same aircraft as a 337 that has been issued, if you have the same model, you can add your tail number to that 337 and not have to go through the whole product. That's my understanding. That's the way that works. It's pretty cool. And again, the Airport Museum, the Piper Aviation Museum needs some support. Bill, you want to talk about this? Bill Kniff, you there?
Yeah, I'm with you.
Okay, here you go. Your thought provoker's up.
Okay. Okay, I think what we're talking about here is that how many are really aware of what our mission is and what the vision is in the bylaws as well as in the real life. Does anybody want to take a cut at that? That's kind of missing here. Oh, yeah, okay. And if we go here, the Comanche would exist. The Comanche world exists to serve its membership by supplying information, know-how to support good maintenance, safety, and affordable flying of the Comanche aircraft. It serves as a knowledge bank and a forum for technical and operational issues, and promotes and encourages social activity to the members. Now, I think what I'd like you to get out of that is that this is really what we're all about. That really supports the Comanche spirit and what have you. And Pete, do we have that email?
That's it. That's what I've got for now.
Okay. Well, the thing of it is now, if you look at this, I think without a doubt, the Northeast tribe is really performing all of those tasks above and beyond, and their performance is there. So, but I think we have to come to the reality that now we're at a point where the people who have been funding this up to now are being stretched out a little bit, and we got to think about how are we going to support it, because the accomplishments are outstanding and really, really, really show what can be done, what should be done, and what is good for the Comanche world. And as we get a little bit older in aircraft and people, we're going to need more sources of information. For example, one of the things that we may ask people to do is to, hey, in your area, would you give us a list of the maintenance people who really are Comanche oriented and doing a good job, so we can share that with the rest of the area. Now, does anybody have any questions on this? Does everybody agree that that's really the mission that we have?
I think we got to.
I got a question. It's Mike Ellis. Has anybody considered setting up like an annual subscription model using PayPal? Or I know for some of the gaming servers I play on, everybody just chucks, chips in to support the server.
Well, I think before we do that, we really got to put a budget together as to what we are spending and what we expect to spend to continue with the level of performance that we're getting now, and hopefully that'll be out by next week. And that's a good point, Mike. Thank you.
I can tell you that the officers of the Northeast Tribe are working on exactly that right now.
Yep.
And I think the money will take care of itself once you guys set up an avenue to make it happen. I don't think that'll be an issue.
Funny you should say that, because right now, if I can find it, I got to get in the way right here. This is the Comanche website right now. And what I was going to also show you is that there is now going to be a second website. We've gone away from, this is the old one, and it has the that NE, ICS NE thing in it. The new one has been modified so it doesn't have the ICS part in it. We're going to migrate this one to another server, but northeastcomanche.org will still get you there. The problem is that if you have saved links to get into parts of the website instead of just going in from the front page, then those links will not work. So it'll take a little learning time for all of you. But one thing we're doing here is, here we go, tribe officers. On this page, down at the bottom, is now a way of getting money to the tribe right here. We're going to be working on PayPal. We have an account, but we haven't got the way to do it yet. But if you want to send money, Northeast Comanche Tribe, send it to Malcolm at his home address here, and he will get it into the proper account. I will try, if I can, to put that into the chat thing so everybody can see it. But right now, I'm pretty busy trying to keep everybody happy. So that's the end of my sales pitch.
One other question, this is maybe a little bit silly, but have you considered changing the name from Northeast Comanche Tribe to something more national? I know that's, or international even, right?
We have been talking in terms of growing the program, either as making it a bigger Northeast Tribe where everybody's welcome, or going to a whole new company. The difficulty is, of course, we're already a separate company. We are the Northeast Comanche Tribe Incorporated.
Right.
We can have anybody as a member we want.
To be clear, everybody's always been welcome.
That again is something that we're working on.
No, I understand that everybody is welcome. I just, some of my Alabama friends might say, I ain't gonna go be no Yankee. That'll be the end of it.
I have a quick question about the structure behind these Comanche resources. Are they supported by ICS or are they fully independent?
ICS doesn't have anything to do with us. They have been absolutely mute.
I mean, we all, as much as we all like to, you know, poo-poo ICS, maybe it's possible to talk to their officers and, I don't know, because it could be good for everybody. ICS could support not just by money, but also by other resources, by expertise. They could support these Comanche resources, but also they could also better justify themselves, you know, in their own sales pitch to every prospective Comanche owner. I understand, though, the downside is that there becomes a paywall. It sets up a paywall to these Comanche resources that, you know, not everybody wants to spend $120 or whatever the subscription is to have these resources. It's just a thought, though.
You know, Pete and I have both been involved with the ICS for a long time, as have a lot of the people here. And so my father joined in 1987. I joined after him. A lot of good came out of the ICS. Maurice Taylor practically single-handedly built it into a organization which in 1992 had about 5,500 members. So although there's not enough time to discuss the recent events, just know that we have a lot of respect for the enormous good that the ICS accomplished over, you know, about 35 of its 45 years. And Ray Fay and I met because we were both doing the ICS events at Oshkosh. So I think we'll leave it right now at a lot of respect for the fine history. And maybe someday there's time to talk a little bit more about some of the more recent events that led us to the current situation. But it's a company, we're a company, and the consortium, which is Piper Comanche
I love
Facebook
the
group.
ICS too. I'm a member.
Yep. Yeah. Well, you're welcome. But the ICS recently started to do some things that are unprecedented, and so you know, Pete and I didn't leave by choice. We were still in there swinging, trying to help. And there was a rewrite of the rules and some things that to this day we can't explain. So we'll leave it at that.
Okay, I
But
see.
lots of respect and a lot of really, really good people. So we'll leave it there. It would be good though. It'd be great to put the resources together.
Yeah.
Is there any part of ICF still left? I'm a previous member, and after they stopped being pretty good, I just let it lapse.
About 1,200 people, Comanche drivers, have left since the removal of the.
I'm sorry. TG, I just muted you by mistake.
Okay, I was just trying to respond that it looks like from the people inside, about 1,200 Comanche drivers have left out of the 2,000 that were still there at the time that Patrick Donovan was elected president. There's an enormous departure after he was removed, and it looks like their membership numbers are still around 1,100 is what we're being told, but you know, we don't know.
I'd like to make a point.
Please, Bill.
And the point is this: one of the reasons I mentioned the mission and the view, and what we talked about before, is that the Northeast Tribe is really performing all of those tasks and outstandingly. And the ICS in its current form really has not done anything. And I think as of the 16th, they were down to 1,016 members, which kind of indicate that the members are indicating that, hey, they're not doing the job. And that job is being done by the Northeast Tribe outstandingly.
I want to thank Bill for his comment. Bill, thank you very much for saying that, and for the assistance that everybody has given the Northeast Tribe, including you, to try to keep the Comanches supported. Bill, if it's all right with you, I'm just gonna, I happen to know that Bill's ICS number is 606. He's one of the founding members of the company, so he has a long history with it. You joined in what, 1975, Bill?
Yep.
Wow. Well, thank you for being part of the Comanche community all that time. We're sure glad to have you.
It's 7:30. If Darrell Pool is ready to go, we're ready to do it.
Let's see. And Darrell was texting me a few minutes ago, so I know he's
online. I know he's there.
there he is. Yep. Okay. And Darrell, everybody join muted, so you will need to unmute to come on in.
How's that? Can you hear me now?
Beautiful, loud and clear.
Good.
Hey, I would suggest everybody goes to speaker view, and that way you can see him up close and personal.
How many folks do we have on board?
65 right now.
Really? That's good.
And we have at least a few that have questions about Hartzell props.
Yeah. And Darrell, typically people are coming in and out throughout, so we're expecting more to be joining as well. So you'll be talking to a group.
Well, we can do this a couple of different ways. I mean, if you guys just want to keep this as a question and answer kind of thing, I have no problem with that.
Well, why don't we, if you have a presentation you're going to do, go for it, and then we'll see what happens.
Not so much a presentation as it is a conversation.
Go for it.
Just kind of talking about props and prop care. I guess to give you a little history, I spent 35 years in the prop business. I'm sorry, I'm looking at this screen trying to figure out what's going on here.
Yeah, Bill, you accidentally shared your screen at the top. If you would, or click on that down at the bottom where it says stop sharing. That's all it is.
Oh, I can do it too.
Okay, there you go. There you go.
Thanks, Pete.
Okay. Does everybody have me on their screen?
Yep.
Yep.
Full screen or just my pretty face?
Full screen.
If you're on speaker view, it's full screen.
That's scary because I take up a lot of screen.
Well, I can minimize it, but the recording won't like it.
I'm sorry for the glare coming off my head. I can't help that.
You're too modest.
For you guys that don't know, I spent 35 years in the prop business, and I own my own shop the last 12 years of that. I sold my shop back in 2014. I'm down in the Houston, Texas area. A lot of people ask me, why did you sell your shop? And I said, the simple answer is the opportunity presented itself. And after 35 years, I was ready to try something different, to be quite honest. I'm still very passionate about the propeller world. I'm still try to stay very in tune with what's going on. At the beginning of last year, I actually signed an agreement with Harshel Propeller, and I am now their only standalone, if you will, distributor for their STC propeller upgrades. Most all of their sales are done either directly from Harshel or they do it through their network of propeller shops. Fortunately, I know the owners of Harshel very well and approached them with the idea that since I am in front of a lot of people with my day job, which is ElectroAir sales, that I would like to combine the two products and be able to offer not only ignition systems for performance, but also Harshel propeller upgrades, which has kind of given me a foot back in the door with the propeller world and makes me a little bit more comfortable to talk with you guys, not only about new propellers, but more importantly about the propellers that you've already got and what you need to do to make sure that that propeller is going to be there for you for the long term. In my opinion, propellers are probably one of the most neglected pieces of equipment on an airplane. Everybody talks about engines. They talk a little bit about the airframe, but the biggest conversation obviously is about avionics and what's the latest gadget that I can put in my panel. That and paint jobs and interiors. But the propeller kind of gets forgotten, but it really is one of the most important pieces of your airplane. Always remember there's 3 TCs to every one of these airplanes. You've got an airframe type certificate, you've got an engine type certificate, and you have a propeller type certificate. You need a separate logbook for all 3 of them. If you don't have a good prop log, I suggest you get one and at least start recording something. It can become something that could be potentially very important in the future. A lot of these propellers have AD note inspections and requirements that's based on not only calendar time, but flight hours. And if you don't have the proper documentation, and the one that I can think of right off the top of my head was an AD note that came out some years back on a certain model propeller on the Bonanzas. It is actually the only AD note that I know of that was issued by the FAA that did not come out as a result of a fatality. They actually, the FAA, and this is on a Mccully propeller, happened to be at Mccully while some testing was going on, and they found some anomalies in certain blades on certain Bonanzas that they weren't too crazy about. So they issued an AD note that required mandatory inspections based on flight hours. Well, when those propellers started coming in for inspections or overhauls, if we didn't have proper documentation telling us the amount of service hours on those hubs and blades, they became scrap. And that's an expensive proposition. I guess the moral of the story there is logbooks and documentation, a very important thing. Typically what I start out with when I'm talking about propellers is what you can do as the owner pilot of your airplane. And this is something that you should be doing every time you fly. The propeller should be a big part of your pre-flight inspection. I've watched a lot of people do pre-flights, and the propeller normally gets a pretty much a kind of a cursory check the leading edges and let's go fly. On variable pitch propellers, there's a little more to it than that, at least in my opinion. You need to be checking not only leading edges, but also trailing edges. Damage in your trailing edges can actually be more detrimental than damage in your leading edges, and people don't really seem to understand that or think about it. But if you think about it, the trailing edge of your blade is much, much thinner than your leading edge. So if you have damage in the trailing edge, that potential for it to propagate into a crack and a potential blade failure is much higher than damage in the leading edge. They're both important, don't get me wrong. The other thing that you should be looking for during your pre-flight is any kind of leakage, any kind of grease leakage, any kind of oil leakage, neither of which is acceptable. Certain Mccully propellers are filled with a red dyed oil. If you see red oil anywhere on the cowling, anywhere on the propeller, that's cause for terminating the flight. Harshel propellers, at least the newer generations, the aluminum hub style propellers, any type of grease leakage is actually termination for the flight. The older style propellers, the steel hub propellers like you're going to find on some of the Comanche 250s, grease leakage on those is fairly normal. Excessive grease leakage, not so much, but a little mist now and then, not a big deal. But those are things that you need to look for. You need to grab the blade. Grab that blade and out at the tip and see how much in play that you have. If it's flopping around in the hub, that could be a problem and needs to be addressed. Go ahead and grab the blade on the lead and trailing edge and do a rotational check. See if you've got a bunch of play, either forward or aft, when you're trying to actuate and actually change pitch of the blade. Those are all indicators that something could potentially be going wrong. And those are things, at least in my opinion, that should be done in every pre-flight. For those of you that do pre-flight, I've noticed here lately a couple of pilots. I had one Bonanza pilot recently, had just gotten his airplane out of the avionics shop. Myself and another mechanic had gone and done some checks on his ElectroAir ignition system. There was a couple of problems with the installation. We fixed that. The owner of the airplane showed up after not being in the airplane for 2 weeks, didn't look at anything, jumped in the airplane and took it out for a test flight. And I looked at my partner, I said, "Can you believe this?" And he was shaking his head. I said, "No, I really can't." And this, I'm not going to name names, but this guy flies heavies for UPS. So I guess he's used to somebody else doing his pre-flight inspections for him. But not even a check of the oil, nothing. But anyway, I digress. I need to continue on. Another thing that you can do, not necessarily on pre-flights, but you can do on your own time, and a lot of you guys like to tinker with your own airplanes, and that's great. Every now and then pull that spinner off and just take a look around. If you see corrosion, if you see rust, none of that stuff is acceptable on a propeller. And at a minimum, take a picture of it, send it to somebody at a prop shop. They'll send it to the manufacturers. Say, this is what I'm seeing. Is this normal? Should I do anything about it? If we let those things just rest, they're going to sit, they're not going to stop. Rust and corrosion know only one thing, time. And both of them can be extremely detrimental to propellers. You always got to remember, these propellers are sitting out there rotating, keeping you cool as the pilot. But when they go away, it gets hot really quick, really warm. And the only way that we're going to keep problems from happening with propellers is with, number one, the vigilance on your part as the owner operator, and also making sure that the propeller shops out there that are performing the work are doing things the way they should. And I can attest, after 35 years in the business, the FAA does its best to manage all these propeller shops, but unfortunately, it's not as great as we would hope it would be. They're paperwork pushers. I've had so many FAA inspectors come into my shop that knew absolutely nothing about a propeller, knew nothing about propeller overhaul. All they cared about was the amount of paperwork that I could generate in a work order when we overhauled that propeller. That's all. I could have a guy beating a blade back straight with a hammer, another guy welding a blade tip back on. They wouldn't have known any difference. They're all about paperwork. And any one of these shops, and I'm not knocking anybody, but any of these shops can do a dog and pony show anytime the FAA shows up and make everything look nice. Probably one of the biggest things that I've encountered in my career is the argument that since I'm a 91 operator, I don't have to comply with the overhaul recommendations of the manufacturer. Well, you're right. That is 100% up to you. However, there's been some recent changes, one in particular with Mccully. They have actually moved their overhaul requirements into what they call their manual MPC 26, which is actually part of their ICA, Inspections for Continued Airworthiness. That makes it a little bit more of a solid argument that you really need to be following those parameters. Many years ago, I was actually the president of the Worldwide Aircraft Propeller Association for 2 years. And my argument and what I tried to get done, which didn't fly, obviously, I wanted to see more of a progressive approach to propeller maintenance. And what I mean by that, as opposed to forcing you guys to overhaul your props every 5 or 6 years per the manufacturer, because let's face it, calendar time is going to get you guys way before flight hours. Unless you're flying that airplane for some type of mapping or crop dusting, you're never going to reach those flight hours in any reasonable amount of time. I mean, most of them are anywhere from 1,800 to 2,400 hours. And if you're flying 100 hours a year, which is probably above average for most GA pilots, there's 24 years of service on that prop. So the calendar time is the big one that catches everybody. And actually the calendar time to us as the guys in the field that maintain them is more important. Corrosion only knows one thing. Like I said, it only understands time. It doesn't care anything about flight hours. I couldn't tell you how many times I've heard pilots say, well, yeah, I've only got 250 hours on this prop. Well, when was the last time it was serviced or overhauled? Back in 1976. Well, that guy would finally decide to do something and bring his prop in, and we'd tear it down and find nothing but corrosion problems and end up scrapping the whole thing out. Then we become the bad guy. If we stayed more progressive and addressed these issues ahead of time, it would save the entire industry money. Believe me, I've done the math on it. And what I mean by that, what I proposed was either a 5 or 6 year mandatory corrosion inspection on variable pitch propellers. And what that entails is a tear down, clean, visual inspection. If everything looks good, put it back together with new seals, new lubricants, and fly for another 5 or 6 years. I didn't really care what that allotment was. In fact, I was pushing more towards the 6 years, which would give you a 10 or 12 year overhaul span. And I think that's palatable by our industry. I really do. But what that does is that's going to find all those potential problems that could arise. That's going to make the loss ratio in the propeller world basically zero. And believe it or not, right now, the failure rate in the propeller world is less than 1%, which is a great thing. But keep in mind, that 1% of the failures, they typically don't end well. I've seen the results, and it's not pretty. When hubs fail, when blades fail, the engine's coming off, and your day is pretty much over. Don't mean to scare everybody, but it's just a reality of what can happen. With that said, I'm going to quickly kind of sum that up. Pay attention to that propeller. Don't neglect it. Take a look at it during your pre-flights. Look at it on your own. Pull that spinner off. Take a look around and see what's going on. When it comes to TBOs and time limits, you might want to take notes here. Harshel, by the way, Harshel and both Mccully have really done some really good things with their websites. Yeah, I know some of you guys have gone to the dark side and you have MT German-made propellers, and that's fine. Used to work on those too. But Harshel, at their website, you can actually download a copy of service letter HC-SL 61-61 Yankee. That's going to give you all the requirements as far as TBO for all their various propellers, all their governors, anything that you need to know is there. Mccully, like I
Darrell,
said.
this is TJ. Would you repeat that?
Yeah.
And I'll type it into the chat window if you say it slowly.
Yeah, Hartshel's going to be Hartshel's service letter, Hotel Charlie, dash, Sierra Lima, dash, 61, dash, 61 Yankee. While you're typing with Mccully, for their propellers that are what we call the threaded series, that's going to be the C1 through the C98. You will find that information on Service Bulletin 137 Alpha Fox. All other Mccully propellers, including fixed pitch propellers, governors, and accumulators, you will find that information in MPC Michael Papa Charlie 26. Now, all this information.
Just to read it back, because I think I misted Macaulay's. Oh, Eric, thank you so much. Nope, wait. So it's Charlie 1-Charlie 98 131-137 Alpha Fox.
Yes.
For the Macaulays, and then all other Macaulays, Mike Papa Charlie 26.
That is correct.
Okay. Thanks, everybody. I'll finish correcting. Thanks, Darrell.
You bet. For many years, this information was kind of hidden from view. And that's actually one of the things that I got done many years. Well, I'll tell you when, it was 2011, 2012. I pushed Harshel and Mccully both to get more aggressive to have a lot of this data online. And they do. They have not only this data, but they also have very pertinent service data available to you. Harshel has gone so far as you can actually type the model number in of your propeller, and it will print you a list of every service letter, bulletin, instruction, and AD note that's applicable to that propeller. Pretty handy information. So you actually will have that information in your hand when you take your propeller into a prop shop for service or overhaul. So I would encourage you to use those websites. They're a great source of information. Back to Propeller Overhaul and the argument for it, the argument against it. I see a lot of guys, because I get involved, at least from afar, in a lot of different forums, just watching what people are talking about, what they're saying. I'll interject every now and then if I feel like somebody's getting ready to get themselves in trouble with their propeller on something they're trying to do themselves. Propeller Overhaul, the big difference between that and what people online are calling an IRAN there really is no inspection criteria to do an IRAN on a propeller. Of course, IRAN stands for inspect and repair as necessary. Well, to me, if you're going to inspect it and you're going to repair it as necessary, that's basically an overhaul. But what it's turned out to be is a lot of these shops will take these props in, they'll take them apart, clean them up, they'll clean the blades up, put a paint job on them, and put them back together with new seals and new grease. And that's great, except you really don't know the whole story. They've done no dimensional inspections, especially on the blades. You don't know if your blades are still within tolerance as far as what the manufacturers say is a safe window of operation. They've done no NDT. You've had no mag particle. You've had no dye penetrant. You've had no eddy current. So all those steps that are taken to ensure that there is no discontinuity anywhere in any of those critical parts, none of that gets done. All you're basically getting is a paint job and fresh seals. And I don't want people to confuse that with a true overhaul. A true overhaul is a complete teardown, a 100% stripping of all major components down to base material. You've got a multitude of dye penetrant inspections that get done. You've got a multitude of mag particle inspections, and now a lot of eddy current inspections, which to me is one of the greatest things since sliced bread. Eddy current has the ability to find discontinuities that are actually below the surface. Whereas you can have a corrosion pit that looks minor on the surface, but as it burrows in, it can open up into more of a cavern. And eddy current technology can see that. It's really cool stuff. And it's those type of things that can lead to potential failures. And doing just an IRAN, you're not going to find those types of things. And I will say again, I'm not a prop shop owner, so I don't have any stake. I don't have any stake in the game here as far as getting money out of you working on your propellers. I'm just trying to make you more aware of potential issues that you can have with propellers and to be more cognizant of it and take good care of what you got, because they're very expensive to replace. Probably another area that I get a lot of questions about are object strikes, whether it be a rotating strike or a static strike. Either one is potentially a very bad thing. I can remember years ago, back in the early 80s, when I first started working on propellers, it was pretty common to have a prop hit a tow bar or whatever with some minor tip damage, and we would cut the damage off, measure the diameter, make sure it was still within spec, clean everything up, put fresh paint on it, and out the door it went. Unfortunately, that practice actually killed a few people. There is more damage done internally on these propellers than we realized when they're involved in some type of an impact. One case in particular that I can remember clearly was on a Navajo. Both props have been in a gear up. They actually replaced blades, did the NDT, put the props back together, and it was a short time later that they had a catastrophic hub failure. And unfortunately, the airplane did a rollover, went in inverted, and took out about 7 people. It was determined then, through a lot of investigation, that the stresses and loads that had been induced into that prop hub, there's no way to measure it. It may not have cracked then, but we've already induced these loads and stresses into already a highly stressed part. Unfortunately, it led to a failure. With that said, both Harshel and Mccully have revamped their documentation as far as, what their requirements are as far as propellers that have been involved in strikes, whether it be rotating or static. On a Harshel propeller, if it's been involved in a rotating strike and it requires blade replacement, it's a 100% scrap of the hub. It's a 100% scrap of the bearings associated with each blade. Basically, it's a scrap propeller. You may still be able to save the blades by diameter reduction, but the hub assembly itself is a scrap. So if your mechanic tells you after you hit a safety cone that everything is fine, I don't agree. I've actually seen situations on a Barron prop one time that it hit a safety cone, an orange safety cone. It damaged the blade that hit the cone, but it transferred that energy to the opposite blade as a 2-blade Harshel propeller, transferred that load to the opposite blade and actually cracked the shank of the opposite blade. The opposite blade didn't take the impact. Just an idea of what can happen internally when you've got a lever arm as long as that takes impact and how that gets transferred inside the hub. Believe it or not, the lower the RPM, the more the damage. The higher the RPM, the less damage that we see internally. And the reason for that, at the higher RPMs, you've got 20 tons of load pulling on those blades, trying to get them out of the hub. There's less chance of that blade moving around in the hub during the impact, if that makes any sense. So object strikes, whether there's apparent damage or not, investigation needs to go further than just a crankshaft run out and stick it back on and go. It's not something to play around with. Another one is overspeeds. Overspeeds, if you ever look at the curve for centrifugal loading, it's pretty scary. It'll be cruising along and you hit about 2,900 to 3,000 RPM, that curve goes straight up and it goes up exponentially. And what that means is the amount of loading on those propeller blades is going out of sight. Instead of the normal 20 tons of load, it could go well beyond that. If you experience an overspeed, all the propeller manufacturers have criteria as to what's acceptable and what's not. It's important, and I know there's a lot going on when it happens. It's important to know how high it went and for how long. Just another thing for you to worry about when you're flying your airplane. Another big thing is lightning strikes. Lightning strikes can do all kinds of crazy things to these props. You never really know what it's going to do. But a lightning strike is cause for removal and being sent into a prop shop. Probably the biggest comment that I want to make tonight is listen to the professionals. The guys out on the line, they've all got an opinion, and 9 times out of 10, in my experience, it's the wrong opinion when it comes to props. That's not the field that they specialize in. If you feel like you got a problem or something has occurred, ask a professional what's going on. Feel free to call me. I don't mind. I talk to people about props all the time. Like I said, I interject on some of these forums when I think people are getting a little crazy and a little out of hand. Just trying to keep people out of trouble. That prop is one of the most important pieces of your airplane, without a doubt. Let me check my notes here, see if there's anything else I wanted to really talk about. Oh, dynamic balance. Just 2 days ago, I had an owner. A lot of you guys know him, but I won't mention his name. He may even be on. I'll let him tell the story. But his mechanic told him that dynamic balance was a waste of time. That is probably one of the most ignorant statements I think I've ever heard. Dynamic balance is one of the best things that you can do to your airplane. And what dynamic balance is, in case you don't know, dynamic balance is some type of professional, either from a propeller shop or a maintenance facility, that has the equipment to hook up to your engine, and now you actually run your engine at a cruise RPM, and the computers analyze the amount of vibration that's being produced. They analyze the out of balance condition and where weights need to be added. So when you get done, after, depending on how bad it is and how good the technician is, shouldn't be more than 2 or 3 runs, you now have a completely balanced system. It's not just a balanced propeller, a balanced engine. You now have balanced the entire rotating system. The smoother that we can operate these engines, the better off you're going to be. Vibration is the #1 killer of airframe components, avionics, and it wears on pilots. The smoother these systems can run, the better off you're going to be. And if you really want to smooth them out, put an ElectroAir ignition system on there, and that'll really smooth it out. Sorry, I had to throw that in there. But dynamic balance, I actually recommend that it get done annually because things change. As damage is filed out of your blades, whether you do it yourself or whether a technician does it, as the engines wear, that balance is going to change. And a lot of times it may be a situation where you have it done and they don't have to make a correction. Well, that's great. Back when I used to do it all the time, a lot of times if I came across that situation, I'd charge the customer half price just to cover my time of hooking up the equipment and being there. Not everybody's going to do that, but it's definitely something to keep in mind. Dynamic balance is a really, really good thing. And I all the shops that I deal with, I press all of them to get equipment so that they can do it themselves. Some of them have, some of them are scared of it, just don't want to get into it. They think there's even more liability involved. Are you kidding me? You already got all the liability. You're working on the airplane. So if you get the opportunity, if you haven't done it, highly recommend propeller balancing, dynamic balancing. I mean, we could go on and on about a lot of other things as far as the details of propeller overhaul. I think it would bore you to tears. I think what I'm going to do now is just kind of open up. Anybody has any particular questions about a particular propeller, model, AD node? You want to talk about the weather, talk about life in Texas? I'm going to say about politics. Politics and religion are off the table. I guess whatever you guys want to ask, I'm here to answer.
And Darrell, just we've got a bunch of questions that have been typed into the chat window, and I normally read those because some people come in by dial-up, so that, you know, if they're driving home or whatever. So I'd like to start with that just because people have been patiently posting their questions. And if I start with you, I'll just read them off to you and then open up for Q&A. Would that work for you?
Absolutely.
Fantastic. So this is CJ. George had asked, I've not heard the prop has a TC and requires a logbook. In 3 decades of PA-24 250s, 2 never had a prop log. What's up? They passed pre-buy in decades of annuals by good shops.
Wow. That's all I'm going to say. Wow.
Okay.
A propeller logbook is a requirement.
There's a counter question.
Go ahead.
Yep. There's another comment on that later on that I'll get back to, but calendar time is what had me, this is just a comment, that calendar time is what had Mike Spartan had his Mccully property built at 600 hours in 10.5 years. It was not clearly noted in his logbooks. Is that a common scenario?
Run that by me. I missed something there. Say that again.
Just a pilot had posted that it was calendar time that had him have his Mccully property built at 600 hours and 10.5 years, but it had not been clearly noted in his logbooks. Just a comment that it looks like we've got some logbook issues to deal with.
Yeah, CJ, I'll jump in there. That's me. It's Michael.
Please. Yep.
So I didn't. It just clearly wasn't indicated, and it took me a while to dig through because it wasn't noted in the pilot, the Mccully logbook. I had to dig down into the airframe books that were like, I don't know, they're ancient. So it was like I was afraid I was going to rip the pages or to break the pages in the logbook. But anyway, I started to notice some oil leaking around the hub. Out of a Mccully prop, and that's not a good sign. And I was noticing that there was a little bit, it was an uncomfortable amount of play. Like you said, grab the prop, rotate it, you know, side to side, fore and aft, and then grab the tip. I do that all the time when I do my walk around, and it was just getting to a point where I was just, you know, nervous about it. So we pulled the prop and sent it down, and then after I sent it to get overhauled, that's when we discovered how old the prop was. At first, I thought it was 20 years old or 22 years old and hadn't been touched since it was installed.
So, is that your airplane behind you?
That is my airplane behind me. Get out of the way.
That is a Mccully C412 propeller. That's
exactly right.
That's the Mccully replacement. They replaced the original 2-blade Harshel steel hub propeller.
Yep.
That's a great little prop. There's no doubt about it.
It's a great prop. It's a great airplane. I love that. Airplane.
Unfortunately, I'm going to be brutally honest with you guys. Most IAs out there, they just don't pay a lot of attention to it. They really don't, and I wish they did. Most of the guys in my area got a big education from me back when I was in the prop business, and I let them know, you know, you're doing the inspection on this airplane, and you're the guy signing your name to it, returning it to service. When you do that, you're not guaranteeing the future, but you're guaranteeing all the past. And if that prop has been hanging out there for 10 years without any kind of service on it, you're making a statement that it's good to go. Even though in this case it's Mccully, their documentation says 6 years or 2,400 hours.
Right.
And they neglect it. And to this day, and I guess probably till my end days, I'll never understand why they do that. I think part of it is most of these guys are so scared of telling you owners that you need to do something, because they fear that if I'm the shop that is hammering people to take care of this, take care of that, I'm going to lose all my business. In reality, what I have found over time, it's just the opposite. You guys appreciate the truth. You may not want to have to do it and spend the money to do it, but it is what it is.
Yep. And a couple of our Canadians commented that Canada requires fixed props to be removed from aircraft and inspected every 5 years and 10 years / 1,500 hours for constant speed propellers.
That is correct. That's what I was trying to get done here in the States, and I got shot down like a like a Japanese Zero at the end of the war. It was frowned upon. And
oh dear.
Actually, believe it or not, back in the day, some of you guys may remember a gentleman out of the FAA in Washington, Bill O'Brien. Bill was an interesting character, and had a conversation with him actually here in Houston one time. He had come in to give a presentation, and I made a point to be there. And we had a conversation afterwards because he had been to one of our propeller meetings, and unfortunately he wasn't treated very well, and that was very disappointing to me. That's a whole different story. But anyway, Bill and I were talking about propellers and overhaul requirements. And he said, you know, Darrell, the biggest thing that turns off the FAA and the way you guys have been approaching it's all about making money for yourselves. If you would ever get away from that and approach this as more of a safety initiative, you get a lot further along. Well, I even tried that, and it still got shot down. And don't get me wrong, the AOPA is a great organization. I'm a member, but occasionally, to me, they go a little overboard. And some of these things that we need to pay attention to, we just don't. Fortunately, like I said early on in our talk, the failure rate's extremely low, and that's great. What I want to see is a zero failure rate, because when they do fail, it's typically catastrophic. Things have gotten better. I will admit, things have gotten much better. People are paying a lot more attention. A lot of shops are paying more attention to propellers, but you're still going to find some of these guys out there that just don't. I could tell you story after story after story, but it's kind of fruitless at this point. I mean, all I can tell you guys is, yes, it is one of the 3 T-seed items on your airplane. It needs its own logbook, and it needs to be monitored, not only by you every time you fly it, but it needs to be monitored per the manufacturer's. And I hate to use the term recommendation. At a minimum, and I'm an aircraft owner too, so I understand costs and how it all comes into play. My airplanes are all leaseback airplanes, so cost is a major factor. But at the same time, we don't scrimp when it comes to maintenance on making sure that everything's 110%. They may not be the prettiest airplanes, because I'm not going to spend a bunch of money on paint jobs and lipstick. But when it comes to propellers, engines, airframes, you can bet that they're 110%. And I guess that's the biggest thing that I want to get across to everybody is just don't forget about it. It's an integral part of your flight is that propeller.
Something that happened to my mechanic, the fellow who maintains my Comanche 180, he purchased a 400 from the US, imported it into Canada, took the prop apart because of the mandatory inspections that we have up here. The prop was scrapped. There was corrosion inside. It was beyond repair. It was scrapped. And he's now, well, the Harshel was like a $25,000 item, I think. He put an MT prop on. But in Canada here, that prop wasn't even legal to fly.
Well, and I hate to tell you this, that prop should have never made it to Canada in that condition. That propeller has a nasty AD note against it, 97-1802, that had it been complied with properly, that should have been caught.
Is that right?
Yes, sir.
So somebody neglected it.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah. Just a question from an alert. Oh, go ahead.
Tattle on my old industry.
Darrell, got a question on that from an alert pilot. This is still questions about the logbook requirement. So they quoted section 91.417, paragraph A, subparagraph 2, subsection I, requires a record of total time in service to be kept for the airframe, each engine, and each propeller. But he's pointing out that doesn't seem to require a separate book. Yes, separate entries. So he's wondering if you could clarify that.
Well, without taking the time to dive into the regulations, that regulation right there is telling you that it needs to be tracked somehow, correct?
Mm-hmm. Correct.
Does it not make just good sense that it be tracked in a logbook, for a specific logbook for the propellers, as opposed to being buried somewhere in either the airframe or the engine log?
Yeah, and the Comanche I'm flying right now came with a separate prop log. I think his question is he definitely acknowledges separate entries, but he's wondering if the separate book requirement is a useful way to do it.
I will have to back off the statement that it's a requirement, because I'd have to do some research to find where it actually discusses it. But it's always been in my career an integral part of an aircraft is to have a propeller logbook. And actually, with the propeller logbook, you should have entries from every annual inspection by the IA or equivalent, foreign equivalent that's doing the inspection, as to that propeller has been inspected in accordance with whatever. And anything that they did to it, if they dressed the leading edges, if they repainted the blades, if they dynamically balanced it, all things that are perfectly okay to do in the field, a record should be made of that.
Yep, and that we have.
It's all about the paperwork trail.
Yep. And that brings us to, there were a bunch of questions about dynamic prop balancing, including one just before you got to the subject. Ballpark cost range?
What I'm hearing out there now, typical for a single engine airplane, is anywhere from $300 to $400 US. Double that for a twin. Back when I was doing it, what year is this? 21? So 7 years ago, I was on recip engines, 250 per engine. Turbines were 450 per engine. And I'll be honest with you, the turbine engines are a cakewalk. They're easy to do, but those guys have a lot more money.
I'm going to put a small plug in here for a prop balancing approach that can save a lot of money and also give everybody a chance to get together and help prop balancing. So, sorry, Darrell, but I just take a second. We did a prop balancing clinic, which was like a fly-in only. You got your prop balanced, and we wrote some scheduling software. And just want to give credit to Les Thomas for writing scheduling software, because it usually takes half an hour to 45 minutes. The deal we made with the shop was, if we get you 10 engines, will you give us a deal? And he did each engine at $150. This was 2 years ago, and we've continued to do them since. And so, well, the reason it worked is, if we line up a whole bunch of engines, he brings the equipment out, and it's one of the dynamic prop balancers that was made for helicopters, dynamic prop balancing, and then adapted to airplanes. And we dealt with the lower cowlings for the twins, because in the Comanches, we didn't have to do a lot of cowling work. So he was able to just go bang, 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 bang. So he gets 10 airplanes done. We get together and have lunch and help each other with the twins where the lower cowling has to come off. And so he made just as much money as he would have, because we were able to line them up, and we saved hundreds of dollars.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I've done similar things in the past. I mean, a big part of it, when you go out and you're just doing a single airplane and you're dealing with it 100% by yourself, especially some of these Comanches and the cowlings, the twin Comanche in particular, love that cowling. You spend more time dealing with removal and installation of the cowling than you do with the balance. And it's that time factor.
Yeah.
That
So this is
So yeah, what you're describing is
exactly. So it really worked out for everyone.
Yeah, it's a great way to make it efficient for everyone. But for the guys that don't have the ability to get involved in one of those, I mean, come on, $300-400 in the grand scheme of things to make sure that your propeller engine system is balanced. It will pay for itself tenfold. Trust me.
Absolutely. We did poll people afterwards to see, well, hey, you got your prop balance. Did you like it? And in general, just sort of for the room, we heard from, we heard from one ecstatic pilot who was like, we had been having cracking in our metal and it just stopped. It was like instant. Somebody just turned off the cracking machine and that just stopped. Other people commented that their cabins were quieter. One person commented that it used to be that my prop seemed to like being at 2,300 and now I'm at 2,400. And so we checked on that, and apparently you dynamically balance 2 in RPM. Is that correct for all prop balancing?
It just depends. It depends on the engine.
Okay.
What I typically would do in the past was have them run it at whatever cruise RPM they like to run at, whether that be 2,350, 2,400. Another thing, and I'll quickly mention this, that gets done at the same time is I used to also check your tachometer, which any of these dynamic balance equipment sets can check your tachometer at the same time. And tachometers are very important. They need to be accurate, especially for any of you guys that have RPM restrictions that you need to stay out of. If your tach is not calibrated and you don't know exactly where it is, that could create a huge problem. There was trying to remember if it was an Arrow or a Mooney. This one became quite a discussion for our propeller meetings back in the day. Operating out of the Chicago area, it had suffered a nick 7 inches inboard of the tip. The nick was dressed, but not completely dressed. And I didn't really talk about that much when we talked about dressing nicks. When you dress a nick, if you don't get all the way to the bottom of the damage, you've accomplished nothing. You have to get all the damage out. Look at it with a 10 power glass, do a dye pin on it, whatever you got to do to make sure that you get all the damage out. Because if you leave any of the damage in there, it's still a stress riser. But anyway, back to this particular event, this aircraft lost 7 inches of a blade because of this nick. But more importantly, what was discovered afterwards, it had an RPM limitation that you were supposed to stay out of. The tachometer was off by 100 RPM. So they had been operating this aircraft in the restricted range, and on top of that had a blade nick 7 inches inboard of the tip, which is where you get the majority of the flex in a propeller blade is in that range. It's actually 22 inches from the hub to 7 inches from the tip. It's that section of the blade where the majority of your flex is taking place. And for those that you didn't know, your propeller blades are flexing way more than you know. Don't ever look at any videos that show you how much, because you probably won't fly again. They definitely move. And it's that movement that it will cause any type of a damage or any kind of a RPM restrictions are because a frequency, a known frequency will set up in the blade, and they don't want that. And that's I could talk about that for 30 more minutes and it would get boring. But just rest assured when I tell you, do not operate in restricted ranges. Make sure that your tachometers are calibrated and accurate so that you don't operate in those ranges. And again, back to keeping leading and trailing edges clean. If you do have a nick that you've got to address, if you do it yourself or if you have a mechanic do it, make sure you get all the damage out. And real quickly, any damage beyond 3/16 of an inch, which is about 187 thousandths, if it's worse than that, get a professional involved. Anything at that point or less, you're certainly legal for you to take care of it yourself with your own set of files. And make sure when after you do file it out, sand that smooth so that you don't have any file marks in there. Look at it with a 10 power glass. If you have that available, make sure you have all that damage out. I'm sorry, I kind of got off on a tirade there.
You know what? You just answered another question lower down. Actually, the nick dressing, you just answered another question lower down. And that was 3/16 of an inch?
3/16 is the rule of thumb.
And okay, and so 3/16 or less, we can do it ourselves with a file and then sand it real smooth and look at it with a 10 power glass. Deeper than that, get a pro involved?
Deeper than that, get a pro involved. If you do it yourself, just keep in mind a propeller blade is nothing more than an airfoil. You've got the face side of the blade, which is the back side, and you have your camber side of the blade. It's nothing more than an airfoil, just like your wing. So you don't want that leading edge to be blunt like it's a 2x4. It needs to have a curvature to it on that camber side. And just look at the rest of the leading edge and just follow that pattern and keep that same curvature when you're doing these repairs.
Great. Okay, next question. Somebody just looked at a 260C. This is Eric. Last annual was 10/2006, and at that time it had only 10.6 hours on a proper rebuild. What would be appropriate now if it were purchased? The teardown as you described for corrosion inspection and reseal?
At a minimum. At a minimum.
Great.
Yeah. Because I can tell you from a lot of experience, when they've been sitting that long, they're going to start leaking.
Mm-hmm. Just a comment with dynamic balance, somebody who did it noticed improved smoothness, less vibration, and 2 different brand name balancers both got the same results, excellent precision. So that's a great endorsement. Terry comments.
That actually brings up a quick point that I'd like to make. There's a lot of balancing equipment out there now. I have my opinions, and I won't express them too much. Chadwick is the oldest name in the business. Chadwick produces a very good set of equipment, the Vibrex 2000. There's a group of guys that branched off of Chadwick that is known as Microvibe. If I get back into it, that's probably the equipment that I will buy. There's some lesser equipment out there that can get the job done with a good operator, but they don't have the capability to look at all the parameters. And what I mean by that, with the proper equipment, you can look at various RPMs of different components in that engine and see if there's something going on there. The computers that are built into them have analytical ability to analyze different RPM ranges and looking at different things and give you the ability to print that out and actually keep those records. And as future balances are done, you can compare those charts to previous charts to see if there's any anomalies that are starting to occur. And that's also in the turbine world, in the PT6 world, that's very common. That's through the Moore program. If anybody is familiar with that, it's required that you do balancing at a certain specific interval. and all those charts are compared and analyzed, and they can tell whether or not something is about to go awry. The same thing can be done on these piston engines if the right equipment is used.
So kind of like oil analysis for trending.
Trending analysis, that's exactly right.
Cool. A quick comment from Terry Lindsay. He's got 3 propeller logbooks. One is the Harshel Propeller Owner's Manual and Logbook for Piper aircraft. One is from Johnston Propeller SVC, and the third is the standard propeller log.
Yeah,
Any comments?
Unfortunately, that's fairly common too. Most propeller shops, if they don't get a logbook sent in with the propeller, they'll start a new one for you that's got their name on it. I had my logbooks too that had my name on it. Really, the best way is if you have an existing propeller logbook, is to send that in or have your mechanic send it in with the propeller. If it's full, they can issue another one. I mean, I've seen aircraft that have propeller logbook 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. I mean, we're talking legacy aircraft that have been typically either in some type of a 135 operation or some type of a work atmosphere where the records are kept a lot better. I've seen that on many occasions. In a situation that he has with 3 logbooks, it's really going to be a matter of him kind of labeling them 1, 2, and 3 up to the most current information on that particular propeller, if that makes sense.
Another question from Robert K. What if the object is a duck or a goose? We got somebody with a stuck mic in the background.
Well, first of all, I feel sorry for the duck or the goose. Down here in Texas, the most common thing that they hit are deer, and that typically doesn't go well. A duck or a goose in flight is still cause for concern, especially if you don't know exactly where it hit. Remember that the further out on the blade that it hit, the more chance that there is for internal damage. My opinion on that would, at a minimum, checking the tracking of the blades on wing, which hopefully most technicians out there in the field know how to do that, where they actually set up a pointer and rotate the prop through and make sure that there's no deflection between blades. Checking blade shake, rotational, any indication of any damage above and beyond. That one's kind of a tough call. Me personally, if it were mine, I'd probably send it into a shop just to have it torn down and at least a visual done and put back together with new seals and new lubricants. Just my personal opinion. There really is no real criteria on that unless there's obvious visible damage. The chances of it being severe are pretty low, just because you're going to be at RPM and it's going to be a fairly glancing blow, which will reduce the amount of loads that are inflicted on the hub. But great question, and probably one that I probably should give some more thought to. But again, I'll go back to my personal opinion would be to go ahead and pull it and do a full blown, take a look at it, take it down and take a look at it. There's, and the reason I say that, there's certain indicators that we can see inside the hubs that will tell us kind of how much stress was put on it. The Harshels in particular, there's what's called the preload shelf inside these Harshel hubs, and we can see any kind of wrinkling or damage to that shelf as an indication that there was a lot of blade deflection. The Mccullys are a little bit harder, but there's still indicators that we can see if you're paying attention that will give you an idea of the kind of loading that was put on the prop.
Neat.
Hopefully that kind of answers that a little bit.
Oh, there's a related question, which is what would cause, this is from Eric Cook, what would cause a blade angle change over 7 years between overhauls?
What kind of propeller?
Eric Cook, do you want to go ahead? Coach, do you want to go ahead and jump in? You'll need to unmute. Let me just see if I can directly chat to Eric.
I think I saw that it said it was a Harshel.
Mm.
Well, and that's I was kind of basically just curious. What can happen over time, depending on the prop model? You've got various components that are involved in the pitch change mechanism for these propellers, the variable pitch propellers. On the Mccullys, you have a phenolic link that ties the blade itself, the blade actuating pin, to the pitch change piston. If you've got uneven loading in the blades, in other words, the preloads on the blades aren't set up pretty evenly, you'll get one of those phenolics that'll wear more than the others. On the Harshels, you have a great big steel, what we call a pitch change fork, and the end of the Harshel blades. This is on aluminum hub Harshel blades. You've got a pitch change knob that is an integral part of the blade shank. Over that pitch change knob, you have a steel pitch change block that slides over a Teflon bushing. That pitch change block is what engages the steel pitch change fork. So as the propeller is actuating over time, and keep in mind, these constant speed propellers are moving all the time. When you're going through, if you're sitting there at cruise at 10,000 feet, 2,400 RPM, in order for you to maintain that 2,400 RPM, that prop is varying pitch constantly, and the governor is controlling that. So you've always got movement, and with movement comes wear. And if those pitch change blocks in that fork are not all wearing evenly, you'll start getting variances between blades. That's called relative blade angle, and that's something that is looked at very closely during any kind of propeller service or overhaul in a shop. The max tolerance coming out of a shop is 0.2 of a degree from blade to blade, and that's all the way throughout the blade, all the measurable stations, and you've got numerous stations. It's the reason that it happens is wear, and it's uneven wear over time.
Mm.
Darrell, this is Ron Richmond. I have a question about the balance. I've had the airplane for 48 years, and it has 3 Comanche 250 blades on a 3-bladed prop for a 400 Comanche. And I'm not aware that I ever had the thing dynamically balanced. Do the overhaul shops do anything other than a static balance?
Most overhaul propeller shops also have dynamic balancing capability, but it's something you got to ask for. Not all shops do.
But that would be on the airplane, wouldn't it? And not in the shop by itself?
That is correct.
Okay.
In my shop, we obviously did a static balance. One thing to keep in mind about static balance is not every shop has the same static balancer. Just for example, the static balancer that I had was a $50,000 unit. That's a little expensive, but it was accurate up to the weight of a small 1032 number 4 screw.
Right.
It was that sensitive. It all starts with a good static balance. But remember, when you are marrying a balanced propeller to an engine, you're now putting 2 entities together that are going to be rotating together. The static balance is the starting point. We got to start with a good static balance propeller. From there, what we're doing with a dynamic balance is we're fine tuning the entire rotating system, because any just a thousandth of an inch shift at that mounting point of that propeller can create some imbalance. And it may not be, and I guess a point I need to go back on and make sure everybody understands, this isn't necessarily a vibration that you feel in the cockpit as the pilot. It could be a vibration that you don't feel, but the airframe does. And that the dynamic balancing equipment is what is the only equipment out there that can see that. I've had numerous pilots come out of the cockpit and say, wow, I had no idea that it could be smoother than it was. I thought that was normal. But I've also had pilots step out of the cockpit and say, I don't really feel a change. But I can show them on the chart where I've made a major change, but it just happened to be a harmonic that they weren't necessarily feeling, but
Yes.
still a harmonic that is detrimental to the aircraft.
Okay, well, I've done all the removal and send to the shop and reinstallation. And so my prop has only been statically balanced for 48 years, and I haven't recognized the vibration. So I've not gone into a dynamic balance situation. I don't know whether I'm just lucky or what.
Well, probably a combination of just being a great person and being lucky.
Well, I think it helps having 8 cylinders dampen everything out versus 6 as well, or 4.
Yeah.
Well, and there's actually a lot to be said for that. The world's worst that I used to deal with were the 4-cylinder Lycomings.
Yeah.
And I used to get so frustrated because I don't know if you can tell, I'm kind of an anal guy. And I would want to balance everything down to as low as I could possibly get it. Believe it or not, Harshel says anything below 0.2 IPS, which stands for inches per second, that's how vibration is measured, is acceptable. My goal was anything below 0.05, which is easy to do on turbines, not so easy to do on piston aircraft, but it's in most cases it's doable. But what I found on the 4-cylinder Lycomings, and I only found this out after I changed careers, I wasn't fighting a mass imbalance or an aerodynamic imbalance. I was fighting an ignition system. Unfortunately, the ignition system on a lot of these airplanes don't really help the vibration situation. With a performance ignition system on there, a lot of that goes away. Little plug for what I do now, but it's true. I've seen it on my own 172s. In fact, I was amazed at the very first one that I had with the ignition system on it, the ElectroAir system. It was the smoothest thing I'd ever seen. And I had the young man come out that bought my shop, set up his balancer, and we did a balance on it. It required 1 6-gram washer to bring it into balance. Perfect balance. It was like 0.03, which is remarkably smooth. But going back to that 8-cylinder, yeah, it dampens a lot of vibration. There's no doubt about it. Do you still have the Harshel 3-blade?
Yes.
Propeller?
Harshel 3-blade, and the blades are so stiff in the hub to grab the leading and trailing edge of one of the blades and try to change the pitch, while you're inspecting it. It's so stiff you can't change it.
Did you have yours modified to the newer blade clamps to get rid of the AD node?
I have no idea. When it's required, I have sent it into the shop.
Yeah, the big AD note that got your prop was 97-1802. That was a nasty one. And that was a result of multiple failures with that generation of propeller, not so much on the 400. But yeah, as long as you're getting it taken care of, you should be good to go. But yes. I still stand by what I'm saying about dynamic balance. It truly is one of the best things that you can do for your airplane.
Yeah, well, I had a 4-cylinder Comanche 180 for 8 years before the 400, and I think I did have prop balance on the airplane with that, but not on the 400.
Well, the other thing on that 400 with that particular model propeller you have, that prop weighs, if I remember right, about 128 pounds. It's a heavy propeller.
It's a beast to lift up by yourself.
Yeah, I know. I've done it. Yeah, one thread at a time. All 6 bolts. Not a lot of fun. But yeah, it definitely does a little bit better job of dampening some of that vibration. I guess my recommendation to you, 48 years, hell, I'd keep on rocking along.
I'd like to jump in and comment on dynamic balance.
Just within the last month for relicense.
Yeah. Go ahead and jump in.
I'd just like to jump in on dynamic balance. This is Fred Dobbs. I've flown a twin Comanche 6,000 hours that I've had since 1970. And you get used to everything in an airplane. And the first time I had it dynamically balanced, I thought I had a different airplane. If you're used to how the airplane feels and you get a dynamic balance on your props, it just makes all the difference in the world. I chased a vibration for literally 2 or 3 years and had it balanced by 3 different balancers. We never could get the shape out of it like I wanted it. Turned out I hadn't changed the lowered mounts.
Yeah.
Change the lowered mounts. You can stand a quarter up on the instrument panel at cruise, but I'm a big believer in a dynamic balance on your prop. And I've, in addition to the Twin C, I've got a bigger Twin C, 601P Aerostar. And I did the same thing with it. And it's just, of course, it's got 3 blades on it, but it just makes a different airplane out of it. It's just like if you put another set of tires on your car and you don't balance them, it'll shake like real. So even though you've had a good static balance on the propeller, I'm a firm believer in going on and having a dynamic balance done to it, because just like you said, the engine is rotating at the same speed that propeller is. Hopefully you don't have a geared engine.
I very much appreciate your comments and backing up what I'm saying. It's funny you mentioned tires. I recently had a new set of tires put on my truck, and the first long trip I took, I immediately felt there was something wrong. And unfortunately, this has been about 4 weeks ago. I've been so busy, I haven't had a chance to take it back in. And I will plug Discount Tire. I use Discount Tire. They've served me well over the past 20-some years, back when I had several shop trucks. But they missed the mark on this one. There's something out of balance, and I can feel it. And I probably drive faster than I should, but down here in Texas, you get out in West Texas, it's 85 miles an hour.
Wow.
I made my first trip out to North Texas, Quanah, a month or 2 back. It's flat out there. You can run pretty hard.
Yeah, yeah. Well, please don't judge the whole state of Texas just on the panhandle.
Well, the duck hunting and the hog hunting was great.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I invite any of you guys, if you want to contact me about fishing trips. I live right on Galveston Bay. I've got multiple people that would love to take you out. If you want to do hunting, I'm tied in with several outfitters and ranches. One of my side gigs, I've got a couple of different ranches that I go to. When they call me, I go out and cook for them when they bring in more people than they can handle. You don't stay my size and not know how to cook.
Well, just one other
I'll just
comment.
say briefly. Oh, go ahead.
Just one other comment while I'm on here. This is my first time with Comanche Zoom, and I'm in Alabama. I really am impressed with this, and especially your presentation tonight. But I'm gonna be a regular on this. Good. Enjoy.
Well, good. Maybe CJ will have me back again. We can talk about the ignition system myself.
Well, I will say that I was going to just make a quick note that it was Darrell Pool, and if you got the invite, you probably noticed that I said Darrell is best known as the prime distributor for ElectroAir electronic ignition. And you can thank Darrell for the incredible group buy special. Darrell and Mike Kobelik is the owner of ElectroAir. A lot of Comanches benefited, and Darrell called me in a panic, and he said, "You've all of the kits are gone. Who can wait?" Comanche drivers, when they discovered that electronic ignition systems could both decrease your fuel burn and slightly improve our airspeed, and I don't know a single Comanche driver who's not like, I want to go fast. How do I go faster? And so we just want to thank you and Mike for the group buy special. When I talked to Darrell a while ago, and I was like, we need to do another one, and he said, we got some stuff coming down the pike you'll want to know about. And so he's promised that we will do another one soon, but they've got some great innovation that he's refusing to talk about that apparently is coming.
Yeah, we've got some exciting things going on. There's no doubt.
Yep. So I do want to get back to propellers and prop balancing. There's just so much interest in prop balancing. So just a quick note to everybody, if you have a shop in your area that you think well of, we will help you put together a prop balancing clinic so that we can get more Comanches prop balanced and more shop owners knowing that we're just wonderful customers and that they should be, servicing us first and best. So we've got the software, we have the process, and we're happy to work with you. Just drop a note into the chat window or send a text to, I'll drop my cell phone into the chat window, and we'll help you put these clinics together. They're a lot of fun. One question that you kind of have answered, but then we modified it, is somebody said, how often do I do my prop balancing? And you had said every year, but then we modified that by saying that like the 400s with their 8-cylinder engines are dampening out the vibrations more, and maybe the 180s with their 4-cylinder engines are really more in need of it. So can we address the finer points of prop balancing?
As far as time intervals?
Yep, time intervals, and maybe also time intervals. And I will just note that PowerFlow, which sells stainless steel ignitions, will double your warranty if you balance your prop. And that's kind of a big deal.
Yeah, PowerFlow's exhaust. Smooth Power's ignitions.
Yep. No, exactly.
Yeah,
but they'll double your warranty if you balance your prop.
Yeah, exactly. And I understand why. Vibrations can be pretty tough on exhaust systems, no doubt about it. I guess to kind of go back and address the time intervals as far as dynamic balance, if you're a 25-hour a year pilot, then probably once a year is maybe a little extreme. Other things that you need to take into consideration, if you, for example, you take your airplane in for an annual inspection, and they decide that your leading edges need to be cleaned up, and they clean up your leading edges of your prop for you, and may or may not spray some paint on there, whatever. If they do anything to your propeller, they now have taken the dynamic balance that you had done previously, and it's gone. Does that make sense? Any filing or painting that's done to your propeller, that balance, previous dynamic balance, is out the window. If your propeller is removed and reinstalled, that previous balance is out the window, because that propeller is not going to go back on in exactly the same position. Most of the time, when I've done balances after a propeller has been removed and reinstalled, they're still pretty close. I've had a couple of occasions where they were off quite a bit. So I guess some of the factors to keep in mind, if there's been any work done on your propeller blades in the field as far as filing, painting, or if the prop has been removed and reinstalled, those are all indicators that you probably need to have another balance done. If you're flying in excess of 100 hours a year, I would do a balance every year. At the end of the day, it costs less than a tank of gas. Well, depending on what part of the country you're in and how big your tank is, but it's not that expensive, and it's something that is going to save you money over time. There's no doubt about it. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, Rich Bergman, you had a question?
Yes, Darrell.
Yes, sir.
Off to the ignition for a moment. What kind of spark plugs are you recommending?
The ElectroAir system requires a much larger gap than standard. We need 32 to 36 thousandths.
Okay.
ElectroAir partnered with Tempest, and Tempest actually manufactures a line of plugs specifically for us that come set to the proper gap from the factory. I don't have any problem with you opening the gaps on your existing plugs if and only if they're certain plugs. Fine wire plugs, if you have the right tool and you're really careful, you can open up those gaps. The extended electrode plug, which is the BY plug that looks more like an automotive electrode, those are fairly easy to open up and get right. Any of your plugs that have the recessed electrodes, for example, a 40E with you Lycoming guys is a pretty common plug. Those are virtually impossible to open up correctly. They all have the tooling to close them down, but when you try to open them up, what you end up with is the outer electrodes are going to want to open up more in a V shape. So you're going to end up with a big gap out there at the tip the desired gap, but then further down that electrode, you're going to have a much tighter gap. And that's where the spark's going to occur. And what that's going to cause is going to cause a misfire on occasion, and it's just not going to run as well as it should. We need that. We need those electrodes parallel to that center electrode. And the ElectroAir plugs are price-wise, they're in line with any other plug.
Okay, well,
especially if you buy them from me. I don't consider myself a spark plug salesman. I make my money on selling the ignition kits.
Yeah, well, you answered my initial question that I was hoping you had, was Tempest rather than Champion. I went through a whole spate with my Comanche, and it's a 260B with the standard IO 540. Anyway, and since I'm an electronics guy and a background in car racing, record holder, by the way, 1,000 years ago in a different life. But I went through the whole thing after I found a Champion shop machine in a guy's hangar who died, and I took it back to my hangar and went through it and made sure it worked. And I got about 200 plugs, and I blasted them and cleaned them, and then I did the resistance checks on all of these Champion plugs. I ended up out of about 200 plugs with about 10 of them that were worth a damn and I put my limit at about 300 ohms. I guess everybody says 5,000 is fine. Well, in my Comanche engine, if you run anything over that, you develop what I call a soft misfire. And let me tell you, what a difference. And then I put 6 Champions in, or 6 Tempests in the Comanche, 3 on one side, 3 on the other on one mag. Mm-hmm. And what a difference. I mean, that alone made all the difference in the world, and about 0.3 of a gallon better mileage. And then I switched them all, and what an even wilder difference. I can exceed on my climb out from Gillespie Field in El Cajon, Southern California. I can damn near exceed Redline. And that's how good that engine runs. Of course, I tuned the injector too, but it really, really made a difference with the Tempest plugs.
So are you running a massive electrode or a fine wire?
No, massive electrode with the spark sprayer standard ignition, the Bendix. Yeah, and I'm a Bendix mag guy.
Well, and I agree with your assessment. There's no doubt about it. We've been super happy with the performance of the Tempest plugs. In my world with the ignition that I deal with, it really doesn't make a lot of difference between fine wire and massive electrode. And when my customers ask me, which plug should I go with, what it comes down to because there's a significant cost difference between the two types of plugs, it comes down to how much flying you're going to do. Yeah. We typically see with a massive electrode anywhere from 500 to 700 hours out of a massive electrode, kind of depending on the condition of the engine and also the condition of the pilot and how they're flying. Mm-hmm. The fine wire plugs, I've got reports coming in now of 3,500 hours on fine wire plugs with our ignition system. And part of it's because of the iridium tip. It just doesn't it doesn't break down. And the surface area, you've got much less surface area for contaminants to attach themselves to. Of course, the ElectroAir system has what's called a wasted spark, which is also it's a cleaning spark. So when you're firing on the exhaust stroke as well as the combustion stroke, that exhaust stroke firing is cleaning the electrodes of the plugs. So it's a self-cleaning system. Pretty cool.
Yeah,
I appreciate your input there, and I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, well, I run fine wire in my 4.2 liter supercharged Jaguar, so I know how well they work. Yeah. And I'll go to mute.
Okay, thank you.
So just a comment and then a question that balance is indeed not just the prop, even a top overhaul changes balance. That's from George Gretton. And then a question, what about the prop governor?
Great question. I probably don't talk about it enough. That little guy is doing quite a bit of work. And I guess to not downplay it too much, but to give a little more of what a prop governor really is and what it's doing. A prop governor is nothing more than a high volume oil pump. And it is taking your engine oil pressure 50, 60 PSI and boosting that up to 300 PSI. And it's constantly producing that pressure, and it's either sending that pressure to the prop for a pitch change, or it's dumping it right back into the case. Inside of prop governor, you've got flyweights. And the flyweights, as RPM goes over what you have set with your prop control, if those flyweights open up too much, it's going to open up the pilot valve, which is going to send oil pressure to your prop and increase the pitch to slow everything back down. Some propeller systems, it's just the opposite. It depends on what kind of propeller you have. But it's a great point that you bring up, and they are neglected. Typically, they either work or they don't. The biggest thing that we see that goes wrong with them is they will start wearing internally, and they will develop too much internal leakage. When prop governors are tested from new or tested after an overhaul, they get put on a test bench, and they actually go through the same rigors as if they were on your airplane. We run them up to specific RPMs. We're setting those limitations as far as your RPM limitation. But a big thing that we're looking at is internal leakage and how much leakage is occurring between the gears and also the main drive shaft. If that leakage gets too high, what you can end up with is a surging propeller in flight when you're in cruise. Of course, when that happens, I used to get that phone call a lot. You know, my prop is surging. So, well, the first thing we need to look at is your governor. So we go through the governor and rebuild it, and we determine, because we run them prior to tear down to see where they're at. If internal leakage was within the good range, we sadly had to tell the aircraft owner that they had a problem with, if it's a Lycoma, you got a problem with your front main bearing on your crankshaft, which means there's too much gap there, and we're dumping too much oil pressure off that front main, because that's where the oil pressure from the governor is being ported into your crankshaft and out to your propeller. So if you've got too much leakage, internal leakage at that front main bearing, and that pressure is being dumped back into the case as opposed to going to your propeller, you'll end up with a surging condition. On your twins, like your twin Comanches, you'll end up with a prop feathering on you. That's a fairly common thing we used to see. Guys would call up, hey, this prop is feathering on me on approach when I pull back power. Yeah, you've either got a problem with the start lock in your prop, or you got a front main bearing going out. Prop governors, to me, should be looked at engine overhaul for sure. Pretty much in between engine overhauls, look for leakage. And anytime you have an anomaly, if you got prop surging, then yeah, that's something that needs to be taken a look at. If it's not holding pitch, if it's not making rated RPM, that's the time to look at a prop governor. But always remember, prop governors, if they do quit doing what they're supposed to do, the fail-safe on your single engine applications, your prop's going to go to a flat pitch, higher RPM, and you can handle that by a power reduction. On twin engines, it's just the opposite. If your governor's not putting the pressure out that it needs to put out, it's not going to hold high RPM. It's going to want to go towards a feather position, low RPM. So a little bit more critical on your twin applications than it is on the singles. Still a critical component to the system, but definitely an engine overhaul. And anytime you see any kind of anomaly, or at prop overhauls, typically when most people would do it, prop governor at the same time. Does that help?
Yep, I'm just gonna open real quick. First of all, a time check. We're at 9 o'clock Eastern, 8 o'clock Central, etc.
Yeah, I'm starting to get hungry.
We have a ton more questions about prop balancing, about how to select the right propeller for your particular mission.
Can we
And
do
if you're
this?
starting to get hungry,
CJ,
Yep.
can we schedule another one of these and just save these questions and do it again?
yes, and I've got a request though, because not all, so forgive me everybody for jumping in. Not everybody can make every week. Could I, so first of all, yes, and just to keep the continuity here, would you be available in the next 2 weeks if we shifted schedules to simply either continue it next week or the week following?
I'm at your beck and call.
Okay. And then my second request, and I'm making an offer, is could I work with you to go through these if I were willing to be the secretary? And this is following something that Garmin did. They had they had a ton of questions in the chat window. They did a frequently asked questions out of it. If I were to be your secretary, would you be willing to go through it with me offline, and then we'll post a document with the recording of tonight's session that says, here's quick answers to the questions in the chat window. And we can cluster them. A lot of them are all about prop balancing. A lot of people want to know, how does it work? Like when you do a prop balancing, what actually happens? Other people have, how do I select the right propeller for my engine and my airplane and my mission? So would it be possible for us to get together offline, and I'll just write everything down that you say and then send it over to you for review, and then we could post it into the with the link for the recording?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay,
One thing that I'll answer real quick, as far as the dynamic balance procedure, there is a multitude of equipment available out there now for people to purchase that want to get into prop balancing. Number one, you need to either be an A&P, an IA, or a certified repair station to actually do the balance legally. The way it works is you have what's called an accelerometer mounted to the engine. The accelerometer is the unit that is sensing the vibration and sending that information to the computers and whatever equipment that you have. There's a couple of different ways that the most common way now is they use photocells with reflective tape on the back of one blade, and they'll have the photocell mounted either on top of the cowling or mounted to the backbone of the engine. And the photocell, what it does, it is clocking the propeller, and the computer is taking the position of the propeller and the imbalance and making all the corrections. And it's gotten very simple for the end user. With the right equipment, it will give you the calculations of the position that the weights need to be added and how much weight needs to be added. My experience for many years, I used a Chadwick 192A that actually used a strobe light. I had to stand in front of the propeller with it running with reflective tape on a single blade. And once I locked on, the equipment locked on to the RPM, I was able to then shoot the strobe at the prop, find that reflective tape, and log the position that I found it in. And that position told me where the weight needed to be added to the propeller. And from there, with the newer equipment, a lot of the trial and error has been taken out of it because the computers are doing the calculations for you of where the weight needs to be added and how much weight needs to be added. Weight is added either at the starter ring gear, probably my least favorite position, or it's mounted to the spinner bulkhead, or if it's a propeller shop, they can actually manipulate static weights that are attached to the propeller. To me, it should be anybody should be able to do that. Just my personal opinion. Most of the balancing I did, I manipulated static weights on the propeller, and then if I needed to fine tune it, I would add weight to the spinner bulkhead. But that, in a nutshell, it's very similar to spin balancing a tire on a car. The technology is the same.
What's the best?
Beautiful.
What's the best one out there now? What's the best piece of equipment?
In my opinion, the best equipment out there now is either the Chadwick Vibrex 2000 or the Micro Vibe. In my opinion, they've got the most capability as far as trend analysis, and can give you printouts of the entire spectrum and let you know exactly what vibrations are occurring where.
Darrell, do you have to do this at your proposed cruise RPM or some lower RPM?
Cruise RPM.
Cruise RPM. Okay.
Yes, sir. When we run into an aircraft that's dealing with some various anomalies, we would do different RPM settings. Some cases I would actually do in-flight testing. We've also had mounted the accelerometers. People also call them velocimeters. Mounted them in different positions in the airframe, just analyzing different areas of vibration. It's a whole technology in its own, looking at different vibrations on the airframe. But just a standard prop balance with a single velocimeter, typically mounted up towards the front of the engine, is plenty good enough to get a good balance on the propeller engine rotating system. When we started looking at some of these other parameters, it typically, what we were finding is worn out bushings and flight controls, different things that you can feel. There's so many other things that you can feel that aren't necessarily an imbalance in the propeller or the engine. Loose gear doors, worn bushings, anything on the engine that's attached to the engine that's making contact with a cowling, or there's so many things that can send impulses that you can feel, but those are typically low frequency, more of a thud type of a feel, as opposed to a high pitch frequency, which is I equate it to a mosquito flying in your ear. High pitch is more of a buzz or resonance that's just irritating, as opposed to a lower vibration, a thud on the lower spectrum. Those are typically can be attributed to something else in the airframe that's causing that. The biggest ones I've seen are gear doors, flight control bushings, antennas that have come loose, or anything on the engine that's contacting either the cowling or the firewall that shouldn't be. I know
CJ said this whole thing is going to be is now being recorded, and it will be saved, including the chat text. So what we'll be doing, Darrell, probably is sending you the chat text, which will have all the questions in it.
Okay.
And that will be available on the website tomorrow for anybody else that wants to see it too. So you'll get an idea what's coming, what's in store for the next edition.
Okay, sounds great. I will close by saying I appreciate everybody's attention and appreciate the opportunity to talk to everybody. Aviation is something that I've been involved in for 41 years, and I don't see me getting out of it anytime soon. I tried once, it didn't work.
Darrell, this was great. Thank you so much. We'll see you next week, and I'll be texting you to find out a good time to go play secretary, and we'll go through that chat window. And I had a couple of questions I wanted to add at the bottom, but when I'm moderating, I can't do both. So I'll throw mine at the bottom and look forward to putting the FAQ out there and seeing you next week.
Anytime.
That is the best offer.
I'm going to close off the recording with this so I can get working on that and go to bed. So I will see you guys all next week. And CJ, you're going to be left in charge. The recording now is going to end.